While pizza and cappuccino are the main Italian traps, there are 7 more that you gotta be aware of. And today we're talking about all the traps for white that are simple, actionable, and will allow you to win a ton of beautiful games. The very first one, of course, starts from these very standard opening moves. We just play the most casual moves ever, and as soon as your opponent castles, we can actually go for this bishop g5 pin, starting the so-called fish and pole trap. Now, while the trap in itself is relatively known, somehow people are not used to seeing it inside of the Italian game, and that's why you can catch them by surprise. Now, bishop g5 feels annoying, you pin the knight, you're threatening to go knight d5 and reinforcing this threat, therefore they're trying to go h6, getting rid of this annoying bishop. But you don't go back, instead you just play h4, sacrificing the bishop. And they actually have to take it, because if not, you're still gonna play knight d5 and capitalize on this pin. Therefore, they gotta take it. But after pawn takes g5, yes indeed, you sacrifice the whole bishop. However, you attack the knight, that's the current threat that your opponent needs to deal with. But more importantly, you opened up this great h-file for your rook. And now, the only thing you gotta need to do is to somehow bring your queen right there, and there are a number of ways for you to do that. And if you can just imagine that, of course, not magically right now, but if you can only bring your queen to the h-file, and guess what, it's gonna be queen to h8 checkmate, which is unavoidable. So that's all you gotta do from here. Now, right now, black needs to attack the knight. And after the knight goes, the most played move by black is knight to h7. Instinctively, they try to somehow cover their king, the h-file, and also, they're actually threatening this pawn on g5, so they want to take it, because there is also this queen from d8. But in fact, knight h7 is already a losing error, because you then play pawn g6, and that hits the knight, that hits this pawn on f7, but the main problem for black is that they can't actually take this pawn due to this pin along this diagonal, and your Italian bishop is actually supporting your attack in the best way possible. Now, they still need to do something about this knight, but if the knight moves, then you just reinforce this attack by going knight to g5, and you pile up all these attacks against this weak and PD pawn on f7. Pawn takes, f7 is coming, which will be almost checkmate. Black will have to sacrifice all of their material to avoid this, and it's already game over. They usually play pawn d5, trying to at least temporarily block your bishop, but you just play bishop takes d5, keeping the bishop active along this diagonal. Now they try to capture it, and there is a really typical and nice combo that is worth knowing. Again, we generally speaking wish to bring our queen right here and deliver this checkmate. But there is a way to make it even stronger when you keep playing every single move with a check. You start off with this rook sacrifice, rook to h8. Black needs to capture it, but what that allows you to do is to play queen h5 with yet another check, which means that your opponent has no time to do anything. They still have to move the king, and that leads to this stunning checkmate. Coming in number 2 is one more trap for white. Here we walk into the main line of the Italian game. However, after d4, hitting the bishop as well as this pawn on e5, they capture it. Here we deviate. Your opponent certainly expects you to recapture. However, you're tossing this in-between move pawn e5. That confuses a lot of your opponents. Now, quick disclaimer, they gotta know that d5, this counterattack, is the move that helps them to stay in the game. Now, that's still alright for you after d5. If they find this move, you just move your bishop right here, then you recapture your pawn because they need to move the knight away, and after that, the game goes on. It's just a normal game of chess. However, what's nice for you is that in most cases, they actually can't come up with this move pawn d5. That's quite an unusual thing, you know, this counterattack. And it's much more common for them to actually move this knight somewhere, and that is usually a losing error. There is no good square for this knight to move, and it's going to be vulnerable anywhere. In most cases, they play knight g4, trying to attack this pawn somehow, but that is just a bad square for the knight. Now, knight takes e5 is clearly not going to happen. At the very least, you can just take this pawn on d4, which would attack the bishop and solidify this pawn, and they're already in trouble. You attack the bishop. Later, you're going to play h3 and kick this knight all the way back to h6 to the passive position. You can then grab it with your bishop and ruin their pawn structure. That is just positionally a winning game. But there is also a trickier line that you may play if you really just love more tactical stuff. In this position, you can play the move bishop takes f7, which is the second surprise in a row for your opponent, but unfortunately for him, all are unpleasant surprises. And after king takes, what's the best time in chess? Yes, it's a knight time. We go knight to g5. You know, a knight is the only piece that can't pass a field sobriety test, but on the other hand, it's also the one that comes with a lot of tactical opportunities. It horses around, has a lot of fun, and helps you win a lot of games. Now, black needs to move the king, and here they realize that the purpose of the sacrifice was to prepare for this discovered attack. Therefore, after the king moves, you then get your sacrificed piece back, but as a result of this operation, you completely expose their king, and you're going to continue attacking it afterwards. Now, to make things worse for black, from all these options available, the most common move of black is the worst one, king g8. And I can't blame black for this, because finding the next move for white is very counterintuitive. Your opponent definitely expects you to just grab this hanging knight on g4, but your queen somehow changes its mind on the go. You know, what else can we expect from the queen? It goes queen to b3 check, the king has to move, and that leads to this checkmate all of a sudden. Of course, you gotta know the main Italian game trap, but there is a caveat. So after we go c3, knight f6, d4, that's the main line. Now we attack the bishop right here on c5, therefore they need to move, and black pretty much must play bishop b4 check. If the bishop just goes back somewhere, then you keep marching with your pawns forward, chasing away all of his pieces and completely oppressing him. So bishop b4 is the only one that helps black to stay in the game. Now we go knight c3. Black still needs to somehow cope with this threat of these pawns marching forward, attacking his knights, but the move is knight takes e4, what your opponent is pretty happy to play. Thanks to this pin, your own knight cannot move, therefore they grab a pawn and they attack this knight on c3. But you stay cool and you just castle. Now after castling, you unpin your knight, there is no king on e1 any longer, and therefore knight takes e4 is a threat. Of course, for black it seems the easiest is just to take here themselves. Moreover, after they strayed, they win yet another pawn and they attack your rook on a1. However, that is actually a losing mistake. Even though black's previous moves are so natural that clearly lots and lots of your opponents keep falling into this trap. Now, here's an interesting thing about this position. For many years, maybe for centuries even, I didn't check this, it's been considered that queen b3 is the winning move for white, attacking the bishop as well as this pawn on f7. But as always, Stockfish came and ruined all the fun. It said that after queen b3, d5 actually helps black to stay in the game. Now, realistically, most of your opponents are not gonna find the move pawn d5, so queen b3 will still be winning. I mean, you know, unless your opponent is super advanced. But the correct move for white is actually the other one, bishop to a3. Now, this move cuts off the black king, therefore black can't easily castle, and yes, they can grab your rook, they will in most cases. By the way, for now, it's already too late for black to turn back. Like, you just have way too many threats. If black doesn't take this rook, like, you can just move it away and counterattack their bishop. You can play pawn d5 and attack this knight. You can put your queen or maybe the rook to the e file and attack the king. You simply has here like way too many threats for black to handle, and black is already lost. Anyway, let's take a look at bishop takes a1, where they just keep gobbling up everything that they can. After this, you go rook e1. This is check, and let's not forget about the bishop that cuts off the f8 square, meaning that black has to cover up their king. After knight to e7, we grab it, rook takes e7 check. And yes, they can give up the queen by taking over here, but after this, you're going to grab their queen, then you're going to grab this bishop on a1 as well, and you'll be up a minor piece at the end of this line, plus their king is exposed, they're undeveloped. Anyway, let me show you this line, what I mean by this. You can also throw in this in between check, for example, and then grab this bishop. Now you're up a piece, they're completely underdeveloped, their king is exposed, and this is going to be easily winning for you. Anyway, let's come back after we just grabbed this thing on e7. Right here, rook takes e7 check. Therefore, giving up material is not helpful. But if they try to run away, that is even worse. Here comes rook takes f7, which is a check from the rook and from the bishop. Therefore, it's a double check. And after the king moves right here, you finish it off in style with yet another double check. This time, rook to f8, which is a check from the rook and by the bishop, which turns it into a checkmate. The following trap is very simple and very effective on amateur level. Here we go back to like the most casual stuff, nothing fancy. We just develop knight to c3. We're still playing white, by the way. If we're playing black, I don't know, maybe offer a draw, do something. So let's say they go d6, you castle, so we'll play the most trivial moves possible. And here after they castle, you then play bishop g5, pinning this knight. After this, they'll naturally try to get rid of this pin by playing pawn to h6. And if you remember earlier, we talked about the fact that sometimes, if you haven't castled yet and you've got your rook right here on h1, then h4 could be an interesting idea, when you sacrifice the bishop to open up this h-file for your rook. However, after you've castled, this then is no longer applicable, you've got no rook on the h-file, therefore you gotta move back. Now they play g5, and they want to push your bishop right here on g3 to the prison, basically, because after this there is clearly no escape for the bishop. It's completely dull. What do you do then? Well, you hit your opponent with a knight. Knight takes g5. And if that didn't help, just come back and keep playing chess. So knight g5 aims to open up his king. And yeah, we sacrifice the knight for these two pawns, but now this pin is really something eternal, very difficult for black to get rid of. The queen cannot move away, because then you just grab this knight for nothing. If they play king g7, trying to solidify their position somehow, that usually doesn't do anything, because the pin remains to be alive. You just go knight d5 and you win the game in a very standard way possible. You're gonna grab it and attack everything around on the next move, but if the knight moves, then they're gonna lose the queen and the game. Now, instead of king to g7, the move that they have to find is bishop to e6. And from here, the bishop guards the square d5, so if you jump their knight there, they're ready to trade off, and it helps them to avoid an immediate disaster, which doesn't mean that their position is good. You can still keep attacking in multiple ways possible. You can play queen f3, adding one more attack this way. You can play king h1 and then f4. I mean, ideally, you'd love to play f4 straight away, just to bring your rook into the attack. But you can't play f4 straight away because of this pin. The pawn is pinned. Therefore, you have to waste one tempo and actually play that move king h1, so that after that you can play pawn f4. That's another very strong attacking idea. You get a rook involved into the attack, and that is usually the end of story. You still may go knight d5, although that doesn't win the game. That's still pretty cool. You keep attacking, they have to trade off, you recapture with a pawn and attack their knight. All in all, as you can see, you've got a bunch of attacking ideas, and that position is still winning for white. And I really love that, because it's very easy for white to play, very hard for black to find proper defensive moves, and usually you win with one of these variations. On a side note, if you want to know how to find proper attacking moves, I've got a dedicated free masterclass that you can find by clicking the link below this video, where I tell you how I find proper attacking moves, how to calculate them, how to find the right one easily, so you can check it out right there. If your opponent is not very familiar with opening theory, they may play the move pawn to d6 instead of knight f6, which is the main move, but that's heavily theoretical indeed. Now, d6 feels secure, but it's not, because that allows you to just play d4 and execute your main threat. You start attacking all around, putting pressure, and that's already not very nice for black. Anyway, here they trade, you still attack the bishop, they play a bishop b4 check, and normally in such positions you cover your king with either a bishop or a knight. And although that's perfectly fine to do that, what it allows black to do is to trade off their dark square bishop. And there is a trickier move, king to f1, that looks absurd at first, looks like you just leave your king in the middle of the board, making it more vulnerable. However, you don't let your opponent to trade off this dark square bishop, and this bishop becomes vulnerable. That's what you want to capitalize on. So there is a move such as queen to b3, for instance, on the next move, when you hit this pawn on f7 and put pressure to this bishop, but fundamentally you have another threat. After black plays anything, develop this knight anywhere, or basically any move, that actually will be losing errors straight away. We go d5, kicking off this knight, which is defending this bishop right now, and after the knight moves anywhere, let's say knight e7 or anywhere else, if knight e5, I mean, it's easier to just trade it off first, and then you play queen a4. And that's the double attack to the king and bishop. They have to cover somehow, then queen takes b4, you just grab the bishop, you also don't let him castle, and life's good. Let's not forget that not all of your opponents were party animals as teenagers. Some of them had posters of Anish Giri above their bed as teenagers, and it's really hard to catch them off guard. But here's how you can still do it. You play pawn c3, getting into the main line of the Italian game, then pawn d4, now they trade, they go pawn bishop to b4, they know this stuff, you cover with a knight, they take this pawn right here, taking advantage of the pin, you walk away, now this knight to e4 threat is real, but they're not falling into the main Italian trap. They don't take it right here. They know that the right move is bishop takes c3. And here, the following moves are absolutely crazy. If you've never seen them before, they look absurd, but trust me, that's the main line, somehow. you know, these fans of Nishigiri had over 400 years to analyze all these positions. The Italian game is an old stuff. So, like, folks know how to play it. And the move is d5. Again, it's really hard to comprehend this at first, but, like, if white doesn't play d5, the problem is black can play d5 themselves and solidify the position. So white needs to do this, making the position completely crazy. Now everything is attacking everything, and black needs to do something. The correct move for black is bishop f6. Just retreating this bishop. Now we still don't take this knight, we go rook e1, because after this we attack these both knights. They move away one of them, then we take rook takes c4. Now they feel this pressure, so they want to castle kingside, and that is the main line of the Italian game. Crazy, but somehow that's the main line. Now black is up a pawn, but you need to do something about that. You need to somehow start attacking. And you do this by going pawn d6. The idea here is just we want to blockade their position on the queen side. Because after this, we attack the knight. If they take, we recapture. And now this pawn cannot move forward, meaning the bishop cannot be developed, the rook cannot be developed, and even the queen can hardly move. Now, they want to do something about that, because if they do nothing, you're just going to continue your development somehow and keep attacking them. So, they go knight f5. They try to get rid of this queen. But we drop it back only one square, actually hitting this knight. So they go d6, that's the move they wanted to play, opening up this bishop to guard the knight. And now they're ready potentially to somehow finalize their development. But you go knight to g5. And that's the really tricky move that I love playing, and even strong opponents fall for this trap really. And at g5 initially looks like an attempt to attack this pawn, because we also have this battery along this diagonal, therefore knight takes f7 threat is real. However, it looks like a miscalculation, because black has these 1-2 pieces attacking the square, and you have only one defender. Therefore, your opponent proceeds the variations, realizes that you blunder, and happily grabs this knight on g5. You recapture, they happily recapture thinking that they're winning the game. However, queen takes f7 ruins those hopes. Now, the king is in check, they have to take, but now rook to e8 is actually a checkmate because the rook is pinned. I haven't mentioned it earlier, but it's worth noting that it doesn't matter if your opponent starts by developing their bishop or their knight, it can easily go into the same position. Let's say they start off with knight f6, you can still go d3 and we have about the same thing. Bishop c5, knight c3, d6. Let me tell you another variation. What if you go bishop g5 before they castled? Now after they play h6, all kinds of h4 moves make no sense, of course, because their king is not there, not on the king side, you cannot attack it. Also, sacrificing the knight, as we talked about earlier right here on g5, also makes less sense because, again, there is no king right there on g8, which you would love to expose. Therefore, if their king is still in the middle of the board, you can try out one more trap. Here, after they've played pawn h6, you trade on f6. After this, we go knight to d5. Hitting the queen and this pawn on c7. There is also a disadvantage to them having their king in the middle of the board. Now knight takes c7 would come with check and fork to the rook on d8. Therefore, if they want to guard the queen on this pawn, they're going to go back. And now we play pawn c3, getting ready for the same central expansion, pawn to c3 and d4, as we do in the main line of the Italian game. Now, the main move by black, the most commonly played move, is bishop e6. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess they're just annoyed by you having this brilliant knight on d5. Also, if they don't do anything about this knight, you can expand on the queen side like this, try to, pressure this bishop. And of course, the position remains to be normal, but still you have a little bit of an initiative. Anyway, they go bishop e6, which is actually wrong. Now, we go pawn d4. Attacking the bishop, and strangely enough, we want this pawn to move forward on d5 and to fork their knight and bishop. At first, this may seem impossible to do because we've got this knight right here, but the issue for black is that they need to move the bishop somewhere. And if they move it either to b6 or to b4, in both cases we can trade off this knight and after this to push the pawn and win the game. For instance, if they go bishop b6, we can just trade and go d5 with this double attack. Now let's go back. In most cases they try to play this bishop b4 check, but now we trade on b4, they usually recapture, and now d5 seems to be impossible because, not impossible, but it comes without this double attack. But you can play queen a4, and this double attack forces the knight to move back. And after that, we come back to our main threat, pawn d5, and we still win the game thanks to this double attack. These were the 7 main opening traps in the Italian game, and of course they're useful, but on the other hand it's very easy to forget them later. So, you may wish to check out this video, which covers 2 universal chess rules that are gonna make you a stronger chess player and are gonna help you to reach the level of 2000. Check it out.